And it's just preparing right now for the live streaming, so we'll just wait for that for a moment. Okay, great. And it's official. And just a reminder, if you do not want to be featured on the live stream, you can go ahead and mute your camera. All right. Okay, welcome everyone. We're going to get started here with our Summer Creative Writing Academy series. My name is Kirsten Ogden, and I'm here with my colleague, Professor Evan Stubblefield, and we're happy to have you joining us today. Before we get started, I just want to say a special thank you to the Pasadena Festival of Women Authors and the Pasadena Literary Alliance for funding our Summer Visiting Writers program. We're so grateful to them for doing that. I also want to say a special thank you to the hardworking faculty grant writers in the PCC Creative Writing Program, Professor Akila Brown and Professor Simona Subakar, and also thank you to our classified staff in the English and Language Studies Division at PCC, Lucky Springfield and Anna Davis, both of whom do so much for us in the creative writing program and for our Visiting Writers series. So thank you to them. We are here today to welcome my good friend, poet Andrew Grace. Today he has an incredible new collection of poems out from Black Lords Press titled A Brief History of the Midwest. And so, look right there. Prior to this new collection, Andrew Grace has published 3 books of poems: A Belonging Field from Salt Publishing, Shadeland from the Ohio State University Press, and Sancta from Asada Foundlings. His work has appeared in the New Yorker, Poetry, Boston Review, and New Criterion, among many other online and in-print literary venues. He's a former Stegner Fellow at Stanford, and he is a senior editor at the Kenyon Review and teaches at Kenyon College, where he was named the first poet laureate of Gambier, Ohio. If you'd like to unmute yourself to give him some applause, please welcome my dear friend, poet Andrew Grace. Yay!
Thanks, Kirsten, and thanks to all of you for being here. I'm sitting in a hot and muggy rural Ohio office, so I'm dreaming of Pasadena. Uh, uh, I will read for about 20-ish minutes, as Kirsten said, and then if there's any questions, I'm happy to chat with everyone. I'm going to read from my new book. It's about 2 months since it came out. And I think I'll just start with the title poem, which is also the first poem in the collection. A Brief History of the Midwest. It's about one of my favorite weeds, the thistle. History is really the history of thistle. Thistle, Pliny's cure for baldness. A thistle destroyed a Norse army when it pierced the foot of a hidden soldier. Crest of a kingdom, thistle, the endless. Thistle cleaves to sheep the color of nicotine. The farmer knows its language. Common, milk, sow, star, blessed. Prongs of thistles hector the farmer's crotch. The seams of the Midwest are stitched by thistle, and a field of thistle hoards its seeds in its chest until thistledown and finch grift its clutch. Its morning blossoms are pink as raw salt. They are shorn and gathered into a pile to burn. Seeds will spread, borne on carbon to new radii. Thus, the next acreage taken by its thorns. Thistle and ditch become synonymous. The hills lay down their shadows like tarot cards. The history of the Midwest is written in thorn. The last reading I did from the book was to a group of over 100 high school students. So I made it through just barely. But it was sort of when you're in front of that many 16 to 17-year-old people, it was very tempting for me to think back to like when I was that age and like how did I get started in being interested in writing and poetry in particular. Uh, and I think it all started, I loved the band The Doors, very much an LA band, and I was super into Jim Morrison, the lead singer. And he wrote poems, he wrote song lyrics, but he also like published books of poetry, which I read with great enthusiasm then. I look back on them now and I don't think as much of them as I did. Uh, but I got so into them that I read a biography of Jim Morrison. Uh, and I read about his sort of process, such as it was, which is basically to take drugs and write poems. That you had to have some sort of derangement of the senses in order to compose poetry. You couldn't just be in your normal state of mind. So I was a scrawny 16-year-old farm kid. I had no access to any sort of mind-altering anything. But I had this idea that you can't just sit down at your normal room and your normal desk and write a poem. It has to be some sort of like uh, enhanced environment. You had to have a poetic environment to write poetry. So for whatever reason, my my idea was that in order to write my first poem, I waited till my parents went to bed late at night. I snuck out. I got into my GMC Jimmy, and I grew up on a farm in Champaign-Urbana, Illinois. So I'm already in a pretty rural place where I lived. But I thought, no, I'm going to drive way, way further out into the middle of absolute nowhere. So I drive out there and I take with me a sleeping bag, a notebook, a pen, and a flashlight and my headphones. And so I drive all the way out there and I put the seats down in the back. So I get in the back of my truck and I'm like sitting cross-legged and I have my sleeping bag and sometimes I'm in it and sometimes I put it over me like a cave and I'm writing inside of under the sleeping bag, and it's working. Like I'm writing my first poem, and I'm feeling poetic, and I'm feeling like Jim Morrison. Um, and uh, the next thing that happens is that I see directly behind my car red and blue flashing lights, the police. And they must have turned their lights off to approach my car because I didn't see them at all until they were like right behind me. So I'm totally freaked out. I guess I had inadvertently, I thought I was in the middle of nowhere, but I had inadvertently parked the car in the property of one of the relatives of one of the police officers. So somebody contacted somebody who contacted him. Uh, and so they pull me out of the car and they question me. And I don't, I mean, I'm just blabbering at that point. I'm saying, oh, I'm just having a hard time at home and I just needed to cool out. So I'm out here just trying to like, get my stuff together. And they searched the whole car. And the sleeping bag, at some point, the officer looked at it and was like, uh, son, who do you have in that sleeping bag? Because it did the way that I had like thrown it, it looked like somebody was in there. And part of me was flattered because my romantic life was not going super well at that moment. And I thought, oh, this guy thinks I could have made that scenario happen. That's quite touching. Um, but I talked my way out of it, uh, and they let me go. Um, and that's how I wrote my first poem. So I thought, man, this poetry game is dangerous.
That is such a fabulous story because one, I'm like, I would have been thinking, they think I'm a murderer and I have a dead body back here. But also, like, one of our students was just asking this question, which I know you're going to read, but I'm going to interrupt you real quick. Like
Yeah.
this, what is that headspace that you need to get into to write a poem, right? Or to sit down and write something creative. Like, how do we get into that headspace? I love that your opening, getting starting story is as a kid driving out in the middle of nowhere, by flashlight, which I think is that like, Dead Poet Society kind of, you
Right.
know, romanticism that a lot of us have when we think about writing. But what is that for you now as an adult?
Well, I realized that it's much better to just sit at your desk and write a poem, not create some exotic uh,
Right.
environment. I think, well, it's been different across my life depending on my life circumstances. So now, because I'm busy, I can go from zero to 60 or zero to poem really quickly if I have an hour. I think ideally I would read first. That's how I would get into, and I always read with a little stack of books. I mean, I always write with a little stack of books next to me, just as like sometimes I don't even read them. They're just like a mood board or something. They're just there. Uh, and they just feel it helps for some reason to have other people's poems near me when I'm writing. Um, so yeah, my warm-ups these days are pretty. minimal, but I also think that that's something that comes with time. Like the more you write, the faster I think you can get into that space. Um, and so when I was younger, I think I did feel like, oh, I can't just like sit down and write. I have to have the right beverages around, and I have to I have to have gone to the bathroom, and I have to read 10 pages or something. But I think it all can be determined just by how much time do you have to write, and do you have the luxury of warm up?
That's great.
Um,
Thank you.
because I was talking about my younger days, I thought the next poem I would read would be the first poem that I thought was any good that I wrote. So this is from my first book, A Belonging Field. It's called Harvest. October full of dust, floating dimly, then falling, the sun burnished garish and whiskey. Its light seeped like dye into the cracked ground. Children softly erupted as their fathers sat in tractors, pulling a curtain closed. I was a child among the rubble, silos spilling bricks from the top down, cold barns filled with mice, pickup trucks half crushed and abandoned, convicts all banished to the same unfinished country. The corn outgrew us, clogging our horizons until all we could see was our small box of sky. My father would come home so covered with dust he looked like a scarecrow, his eyes colored hollow with black marker. Staring contests to pass the time, my brother and I, tears running down our cheeks, mother walking in and asking, "What's wrong?" I learned about disappearing as the combine left its trail of crop dust, a blizzard of absence billowing into the remaining stalks. Each row of corn was a collapsing wall to a museum of emptiness. I have always felt that I have been spared somehow. At night, we snuck out into the freshly shorn fields to make sure our neighbors were still there, house cloaked for months by the climbing plants. We would see the neighbor children had escaped with us, pale, desperately chasing after themselves across their moon-filled yard. We would send them messages in code with our flashlights, saying, "From over here, you look like ghosts." I think for the next poem, I'm going to go back to the new book, but I'm going to do the annoying poetry reading thing where I'm going to set up the poem. That the setup for the poem is going to be way longer than the poem itself. Uh, but it's a poem called "For the Silo Boys," and the original sort of conception of it was about 10 years ago. There was an article in the New York Times about these deaths of boys doing farm work in rural areas and doing this very specific job. Because the sort of ethos of, and maybe some of you are familiar with this, like the ethos of like rural living and especially being like the farmer's kid is that you kind of can do men's work, like you can operate machinery and sort of do uh, jobs around the farm that are really kind of too old for you, but you kind of we just like look the other way because if it's the farmer's kid, it's okay. So the specific job was if you're storing grain in a metal silo and it gets any moisture in there at all, when you want to take the grain to market and you want to drain it all out and move it, if there's moisture in there, the grain will stick to the sides of the silo and farmers want every penny that they can get out of all of that grain because farming has no salary, no health insurance. So you want to maximize how much you can get out of every harvest. And so a job that these boys were doing were that when they were draining the silo, they would get in the silo on top and stand on the grain and take like a broomstick or something and scrape the sides of the silo as it's getting drained and as the surface is lowering so they can get every last kernel. But what happens in that scenario, you can probably imagine, is that once it reaches sort of a certain level of draining, it starts to spiral. And so basically it becomes like a whirlpool, but a whirlpool of like corn, say, as opposed to like a whirlpool of water. And so these boys were basically like drowning. but drowning in grain. And I never did that job as a kid. I don't know anybody that had anybody do that job, but I was just I related to that story because I know that I did stuff as a kid that was too dangerous. Uh, and so I had that in mind. And for whatever reason, I was listening to the audiobook of the Iliad. So I had that in my mind. And there's this moment in the Iliad, which is about a war. And so it's a moment in which they're at a standstill, the two sides, and they call for like a ceasefire for a night. Uh, and so one group goes and does a big bonfire and says, okay, let's have a meeting about what we should do next. Can we win this war? The other side goes to their side and they have a big bonfire and they have a meeting about what's our new strategy. And so one side says, you know what we should do? I bet right now they're discussing battle plans. So we should send a spy over to their side and listen to what they're about to do next. And then on the other side, they say, you know what we should do? I bet they're over there discussing plans. We should send a spy to that. So they both have the same idea. On one side, the volunteers to be the spies are Odysseus and Diomedes, which, if you know the Odyssey or the Iliad, these are like the heroes. These are like the strapping, uh, savvy war veterans. So they volunteer on one side. And on the other side, when they say, okay, who's going to be our spy? Who's going to volunteer? Uh, it's silence. It's an awkward silence. Nobody wants to do it. Uh, and eventually, this character that you just see for this brief moment, this character Dolan, a teenage kid, not famous, but like thinks that this is his moment to like be heroic. Uh, he volunteers, and they say, "Okay, great, Dolan, good luck." Uh, and predictably, uh, Odysseus and Diomedes intercept Dolan. They find him and they say, what are you doing out here? And they say, okay, if you tell us everything you know about your army's plans, we'll let you go. And so he tells everything that he knows, and they kill him anyway. So in my mind, there was some connection between those boys and Dolan, and so that's what I'm trying to articulate in this poem. For the Silo Boys. When the corn gave, a boy was sucked to the bottom of the cement silo, whose walls he was paid almost nothing to scrape clean with a steel pole. It took 35 men to pull his body from the outlet spout. Corn had plugged his nostrils, ears, and throat as far down as his lungs. In the calf barn, rescuers cleared the field of his face. A few fistfuls of grain a calf sluggishly ate on its way out to pasture. In the Iliad, the moment Dolan, young, ugly, volunteered to spy on the Argives when no one else would, he was doomed to have his weasel cap stripped, while his head rolled into a trench darkened with other sons' blood, where his mouth would slowly fill with blades of grass. The postscript on that poem, it was published in the New Yorker, which I was very pleased. That was that's one of the goals, I think, of a lot of poets, because poetry is fairly invisible in pop culture, and the New Yorker is like the one of the only like glossy, multi-million subscriber platforms. So I was all proud of myself, and I wanted to see my name in that font. I fetishized that, and then I get this email. They have very rigorous fact checkers at the New Yorker. They fact check fiction, they fact check their comics, and as I learned, they fact check their poems. So I get this email saying from the New Yorker fact checkers saying, "Mr. Grace, we found an ethical problem with your poem." I thought, an ethical problem. I thought they were gonna say like I plagiarized it or something, which I no, I didn't. Uh, and they said, okay, well, we went back and looked at that New York Times article that you based the poem on, and uh, I guess inadvertently, it was an article about I think three or four boys, but inadvertently, all of the specific details that I use in the poem were from the death of just one of the boys. His name is Tommy Oshier. I'm not sure if I'm saying it right. It's Osier. And they said because anybody that read that article and then read the poem, they would know that you're talking about this specific boy. So in a case like this, it is our stance that we have to ask permission of the family of the boy, uh, because we think that's the ethical thing to do. And they said, well, we can do it or you can do it. Uh, and I thought, I will not be doing that. They don't know what type of coward they are dealing with. Absolutely,
That is
absolutely not.
wild that they would ask that. Wow.
Yeah, and so at first I was like, yeah, you do it. You go ahead, fact checkers. Uh, because I didn't want, I just didn't want to cause the family pain to be like, hey, remember how your son died? I'm here to remind you. Or that I'm like profiting off of this, which I guess, of the places that pay in poetry, New Yorker is one of the better ones, but it's still, we're talking about not very much money at all in the grand scheme of things. So I mulled this over and I talked to my eternally wise wife. And over dinner, I explained the situation, and she's like, "No, you have to do it because you can talk about your background and you can talk about Dolan and all that stuff that you're trying to say. Like they're not going to explain it, that who knows how they're going to put it." So I tracked down the mom's email. The mom started a website about silo safety, Tommy's Advocates for Silo Safety. I mention it in the acknowledgments of the book. Uh, and so I send an email and I explain all that I'm trying to say and I ask permission and she doesn't get back to me for a few days. And eventually she does, and she's very sweet and understanding about it and gives me permission. Uh, and I think my favorite part of the story is that she does speaking engagements through the Tommy's Advocates for Silo Safety, and sometimes she reads the poem when she's doing a speaking engagement, which I was very moved by. But it also just taught me that I feel like sometimes because poetry is not journalism. We're not necessarily going out into a field and like meeting people and emailing, and we just kind of we can observe the world and we write, especially if we're writing about like current events. We observe what's going on and we write about it, and maybe we publish something, and maybe somebody reads it, or maybe it's just your buddies that say, "Hey, I saw your poem in this. Good job." Uh, but that was one moment where I was like, when you put stuff out in the world, you don't know where it's going to lead you. Because if you would have told me when I was writing that poem on my couch that I was going to have to like actually be in touch with anybody involved in that article, I would have been flabbergasted. So you just never know. And I like being reminded that, art isn't always done at a remove. It can actually draw you out into the real world with like actual personal connections. Um, I guess maybe I'll read two more. Kirsten, is that okay?
Yeah.
This one, this is a little bit of a longer one. Uh, it's called The End of the Midwest, and it's about an earthquake. I know that we associate earthquakes more with your part of the world, not so much the Midwest. We used to live in Berkeley for 3 years, and my wife is terrified of earthquakes. And we subscribed to the San Francisco Chronicle newspaper, physical copies. And she got so freaked out anytime there was an article about earthquakes that I guess this is sort of like a sitcom thing to do or something. I would read the paper first and to cut out any article that was about an earthquake and then put it back together and hand it to her. So sometimes she would be like, what happened to the paper? But I just wanted to screen all of that because she just worried about it so much. But the largest earthquake in American history is actually in Missouri. It was in the Midwest, in the New Madrid fault line. So I wrote this poem, The End of the Midwest. And I guess I say I wrote it. This is more of a collage of other people's language. So a lot of it is a written record by a survivor of the earthquakes. And I'm also weaving in lines from Revelations from the Bible. And then my only part is I write sort of the drier prose sections that kind of explain the history. Uh, so some of the fun that I had with this book, the title is somewhat facetious in that it's not an actual like historical record of the Midwest. But I did have fun interacting with historical documents. And so that's what's going on here. The end of the Midwest. For 3 days in the early 1800s, the Midwest ceased to exist. The strongest earthquakes on record tore open the Reelfoot Rift in New Madrid, Missouri. The Mississippi River ran backwards for several hours. A lake in Michigan began to boil, and immediately a vast number of large tortoises rose to the surface and swam rapidly to the shore, where they were taken for food by the locals. I know thy works, that thou hast a name, and that thou livest and art dead. December 16th, 1811. The roar I thought would leave us deaf if we lived. It was not a storm. When you could hear, all you could hear was screams from people and animals. It was the worst thing that I have ever witnessed. It was dark, it was still dark, and you could not see nothing. You could not hold on to nothing, neither man or woman was strong enough. The shaking would knock you loose like knocking hickory nuts out of a tree. We was all banged up and some of us knocked out for a while and blood was everywhere. We still had our home, it was some damage. Some people that the home was not built too strong did not. We will have to hunt our animals. If this earthquake or whatever it was did not happen in the territory of Indiana, then me and my family is moving to Pigeon Roost. Be watchful and strengthen the things which remain that are ready to die, for I have not found thy works perfect before God. Every church bell rang from St. Louis to Philadelphia. Dolly Madison, the First Lady, was awoken by the tremor in the White House. Clocks stopped in Chicago. Chimneys slid from roofs in Cleveland. In Pittsburgh, underground lights shone up from the chasms as deposits of quartz squeezed and sparked. The sun did not shine on America east of Nebraska for 4 days, and the sun became black as sackcloth of hair. January 23rd, 1812. What are we going to do? You cannot fight it because you do not know how. It is not something that you can see. In a storm, you can see the sky and it shows dark clouds, and you know that you might get strong winds, but this you cannot see anything but a house that just lays in a pile on the ground, not scattered around, and trees that just falls over with the roots still on it. The earthquake or whatever it is come again today. It was as bad or worse than the one in December. We lost our Mandy Jane in this one. A log fell on her. We will bury her upon the hill under a clump of trees where Bessie, Ma, and Pa is buried. A lot of people thinks that the devil has come here. Some thinks that this is the beginning of the world coming to an end. I will spew thee out of my mouth. The earthquake created the world's largest sand boil as a slurry of pressurized water and sand erupted volcanically, foundering the overlying sediment. Today, in the midst of farmland, 136 acres of sand remains in the Missouri Boot Heel, about 8 miles west of Haiti. Locals call it the beach. For the great day of wrath is come, and who shall be able to stand? February 8th, 1812. If we do not get away from here, the ground is going to eat us alive. We had another one of them earthquakes yesterday. We are all about to go crazy from pain and fright. We cannot do anything until we can find our animals or get some more. We have not found enough to pull the wagons. And the 4 beasts said, Amen. The land undulated, chasms opened and swallowed horses and cows whole. Some fissures were as long as 5 miles. People discovered that most of the crevices opening ran from north to south, and when the earth began moving, they would quickly chop down trees in an east-west direction and hold on using the tree as a bridge. There were missing people who likely fell untold stories underground. If therefore thou shalt not watch, I will come on thee as a thief. March 20th, 1812. I do not know if our minds have got bad or what, but everybody says it. That was one where I thought that maybe I would write the character of the guy, of the survivor, like mediate it through my voice. But I thought, no, it's probably best just to let him say it because I think it really conveys. And I leave in all the typos and stuff, because you really get a texture of like how terrifying it would be not only to have the uh, to survive those earthquakes, but not even knowing that an earthquake was a thing in the first place, like not even having that concept in your mind it really must have felt like the end of the world. Um, so I think the last one uh, that I'll read uh, is called Not a Mile. Um, and speaking of the end of the Midwest, we were hit very hard by the opioid crisis. It's slightly better in recent years. The numbers are going down of overdoses, but Ohio was hit pretty hard. And so I read this book. If you're interested in the subject, I mean, it's sort of grim reading, but it's called Dreamland by Sam Quinones, and it's about Portsmouth, Ohio. And it kind of takes the Portsmouth as like a case study of like a pill mill town that like was once uh, sort of a standard Norman Rockwell Midwestern town, but was really decimated by these drugs. And so I read that book, and then I saw somewhere locally that he was going to be there was a community meeting about the crisis in the next town over, Danville, and that they were going to Zoom in San Quinones. So I was like, oh, I read the book. It's just down the street. I'll go to the thing. Uh, and so I go, and there's an interview with him, but there's also police officers, local police officers there, and they were giving testimonials about their experience. Uh, and it stuck with me because it really did seem haunted. And then they were saying, this if you're a police officer, you're always going to be dealing with some kind of scariness. They were like, we usually like the worst thing we usually get is like domestic violence or something, but now we're getting house parties where we're going into a house and it looks like everybody's dead. Like eight bodies, but they've all just OD'd and they administer Narcan and they come back alive. But so I was thinking about what they were saying, and I also really love teaching the Sylvia Plath poem "Lady Lazarus." Uh, so I was grading papers from students writing about that poem, and so I put those things together. And this will be the last one I read. So if you have any questions afterwards, I'd love to hear them. Not a mile. Not a mile from where my students ask me why Sylvia Plath wanted to eat men. Two men overdose. This is rural Ohio, and the new drugs from Columbus are cut with elephant tranquilizers. The police are nurses now. They don't dream. My students try to understand why the voice in the poem brags about death, but never dies. A mile from here, two men regain consciousness in their living room full of litter boxes and Optimos. They are not particularly scared by the police or their IVs. They have both died before and been revived with Narcan. It's November 6th, and the sky has been blank for so long its emptiness has turned supple. The men refuse further medical treatment. One dumps a baggie of crickets into a lizard tank. My students are sincerely trying to analyze death, its cadence and anaphora, its German origins. The police do not know how to speak to my students. They bark and lord over a scuffle or jaywalking because they are used to hauling the dead back to life and fishing names out of their mouths. They cannot help but see everyone as needing to be saved by force. Not a mile from where my students show me outlines of what they are trying to say about resurrection, one of the men pulls a phone out of his mesh shorts and calls Columbus. My students worry they cannot explain where Plath ends and death begins. Not a mile from our classroom, men dissolve like powder in water. Men so close we can't see them. Men like air. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Andy Grace. Beautiful. So everyone, if you want to, you can put your questions in the chat, but you are also free to unmute yourself and ask. We can just do a little casual, and I'll just get Andy started with a question about structure, and we were talking in my class about the structure choices of the poems, and you have some really long poems. You talked about the collage style poem that you read a little bit, and I wonder if you could just talk about poetic structure and how that comes to you, and you know we were asking ourselves what makes a poem a poem. So
Oh
that's
man.
yeah. We didn't answer it. We said we'd save it for you.
Well, I'll stick to the form question first because the second one scares me too much. So for some of the poems, so like you're right, I'm writing. These are some of the longest poems I've ever written. But like the poem Knox County, and then that whole sequence, Boyne River Daybook. I'm just stealing other people's forms. So Knox County is just Lorraine Niedecker, uh, who is a name you may or may not know. I guess she's a little off the beaten path, but she was of the objectivist school and lived in rural, sort of wetland Wisconsin, and wrote this great poem called Peon to Place. And it has the sort of uh, tercets, three-line stanzas that are sort of in this like stair step form. And so I was just like, I'm just going to pretend I'm Lorraine Niedecker and I'm going to write in her form. And that's what I'm doing there. And for Boyne River Daybook, it's all Charles Wright and particularly his book, Black Zodiac. Uh, so this is something that I do. This is something I do, especially when I'm stuck. Uh, like if I can't think of what to write for a new poem, I will just take a poem that I like and I will just treat it like it's a set form and just match it line for line. So if the poem that I'm working from, the first line is 10 syllables, my first line is 10 syllables. Next one, 12, next one, 12. When there's a stanza break in that poem, stanza break in my poem. So I think that sometimes when I get scrambled is when I'm trying to make form and content decisions simultaneously. So if I can just like farm out the form to just be like, I'm just going to do whatever that poet does. It sometimes can help me figure out what I want to say if I'm not also thinking about how it's supposed to look. Um, I generally write first drafts that are flush left, no stanza breaks. And so I think a lot of the poems just kind of wind up staying that way. Uh, and I feel like I usually use a stanza break for pacing purposes. If I want to pause or I want to slow the reader down, I'll have a stanza break. Or uh, some of my work can be dense, and I think this is when I'm being hard on myself. I think this is like one of my weaknesses as a poet is that my language can get too dense, and so sometimes I will put in stanza breaks or just like space to just give the reader time to process the language if it's getting uh, complex. So I think I use the space of the page uh, for pacing and for like just legibility, being able to comprehend uh, when you can read language that has space around it. I think we read a little bit slower and could therefore process.
That's great. We have just about 10 minutes, everybody, so we'll try to get through. There's a ton of questions, but Abe, I wonder, will you unmute and ask your question and explain it a little because I didn't fully get it. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm a psych major and I'm really interested in sort of like the low forms of communication that aren't explicit all the time in words. And I was curious, in your work, do you try to symbolize sort of like psychological states in your poetry? I'm just curious.
Do I try to symbolize psychological states in my poetry? No. Uh, but I think, well, not consciously. I think I do that because I think it'd be hard to write poems that don't uh, include, the psychological states of people, whether it be the speaker or whoever the poem is about or addressed to. Uh, but in terms of thinking about that as like as part of my process. I can't say that I do. I have to say when I'm writing, I don't want to think too much. I just want to write. And so I like when I sort of have an empty mind and I don't like ideas. Uh, I don't like having ideas before I'm writing. I like the ideas to come while I'm writing. Because for me, the fun of writing, I don't even know if fun is the right word, but the satisfaction maybe is like when I don't know what I'm going to say next. I like that sensation.
That's pretty great. Coming through the writing, I really love that. A couple of people are asking, so I'm going to paraphrase. Uh, is there a writer or a particular book or experience that you feel like changed the way you approach writing or your writing process, or who is a writer or writers that inspire you?
Yeah, I mean, there's too many to mention, and if you asked me this in an hour, I'd have uh, a different answer. Yeah, I mean, I already mentioned Niedecker and Charles Wright. I love C.D. Wright. It's just the letters C.D. Wright, because her tone, she's from Arkansas, and so writes about rural stuff like I do, but just in a different area. But her tone is just always so on point and mysterious, and I don't always understand the poems, but I like them anyway. Uh, I love Diane Seuss. If you had to ask me who's like the best American poet writing in English right now, I would probably say uh, Diane Seuss. Um, I love Gwendolyn Brooks and the way that she writes about Chicago. As you can tell, I like people that write about places. So I love Niedecker's Wisconsin and C.D. Wright's Arkansas and Gwendolyn Brooks is Chicago. But I guess experiences, I definitely was very influenced by my teachers. Uh, I had an Australian poet when I was an undergrad, John Kinsella, who really encouraged me. And he's the reason why I took it seriously in the first place, because he treated me as if I was particularly good at it, and nobody had ever treated me that way before. Um, and not by choice, but I wound up being the student of a lot of infamously uh, brutalist workshop leaders, Carl Phillips and Evan Boland specifically. Uh, and they spared nothing. And they were also, but we loved them. And so they had that pedagogical thing where they could like tear you down, but it's because they care so much about your poem. They don't really care as much about you, but they care about your poem so much that they're going to treat it as something that needs to be treated seriously. And when you fail the poem, you have sinned, and you have to get castigated in front of the group. And it wasn't always pleasant, but to have somebody treat my work that seriously, to even like care to be harsh about it, uh, I felt like I was sort of forged in those fires a bit, and so I started taking my own work more seriously.
I love that. And who is the writer you named after Carl Phillips, the other writer?
Oh, Van Boland, rest in peace.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Our Professor Gail Brady is here and wants to know a little bit more about how you classify yourself as a regional poet. And one of the students asked about, what draws you to writing about that place, that regionality from where you come from.
I guess I'm a nostalgic person. I'm nostalgic for my childhood farm, but I also think a different way of thinking about being a poet of place, as opposed to like thinking about like, oh, I'm choosing to write about a region. Uh, I wonder, and maybe this goes back to the psychological states question. I wonder if because I grew up where I grew up, which is a prairie, rural, it was just my parents and my brother, and then the next house, kind of the only house that we could like see was my grandparents' house. So it was a very small cast of character and whatever like farm hands we were employing at the time. I didn't grow up around a lot of people. I grew up around a lot of space. And so I wonder if I became the writer that I became because of where I grew up. if I grew up in a busy apartment building, I don't think I would be the poet I am now. So I think there's a way of like thinking of poet of place as like a poet is generated by the place as opposed to a poet is looking at the menu of things to write about and, picking a landscape or picking a region. I wonder if it's like maybe this is a chicken and egg thing, but like I wonder how much all of us are influenced by the places we came from, and my style and my aesthetic is dictated by the place that I came from, as much as anything else.
Yeah. We have just a couple more minutes, and so I'm going to close out with a question that one of my colleagues likes to ask all the writers who visit Akila Brown. She wants to know what you're watching, what you're listening to, and what you're reading.
What I'm watching, I'm watching Below Deck
Yeah.
because I don't like to think at night. So I watch that with my wife before bed. Uh, what I'm listening to, uh, in terms of what I'm currently listening to, uh, oh, like the album that I'm listening to like at the moment, is the rap group Arm& Hammer. I guess they would be like art rap, but like really, really dense linguistic lyrics. I would recommend them. Um, and what am I reading? I just read Cindy Oak's book, uh, Ward Toward, who she teaches up at UC Davis. Uh, and she was my colleague here at Kenyon. I can recommend that. I'm reading this oral history of hip hop called The Come Up by Jonathan Abrams, uh, which I'm really enjoying. It's not really breaking new news, but it's kind of like telling the entire story in like a big sweeping way that I think is useful. And I'm reading a Paul Muldoon poetry book that I'm not loving, honestly.
Oh,
I
that's
like his work overall, but this one isn't hitting with me.
yeah. Thank you. Okay, everybody, just a reminder, if you would, please be sure to fill out the survey on your experience today. And if you want to unmute and thank Andrew Grace for joining us today. Thank you so much, Andy.
Thanks, everybody.